Lore for Mansoul, a John Bunyan classic as told by Ethel Barrett. Before we go too much further in this thing, I've been tripping over the name Boanerges. I didn't believe that I could trust myself to remember correctly, so I checked it out. I looked it up while I was doing the editing of the last video, and I was reminded that Boanerges is a word that appears only once in Scripture, and it is the word that Jesus used to name James and John, the sons of Zebedee, the sons of thunder. It only appears once, and it's not specified in Scripture why Jesus gave them that name, even though it is guessed that it is because they were impetuous and not necessarily, they were impetuous and hot-tempered, and not necessarily I don't know. It doesn't make sense. This might be another wobble. It doesn't make sense to name an entire character and make him a general leading a faction of thousands. But whatever. People do that a lot in Scripture. They take a word that appears only once in Scripture and they turn it into entire doctrines, and they go way off in the weeds. Everybody does it. Not everybody, but a lot of people do it. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything theologically speaking. It's just an annoying word to try to say. It only appears once in Scripture. So that's where the word is coming from, for those of you who don't know. Boanerges, or however it's pronounced, is Jesus' name for James and John, the sons of thunder. Now we may continue. Chapter 9, Shaddai's forces repulsed. Trumpets were blown, and the king's army leaped into action. Banners waved, and from 40,000 men the battle cry went up, "Ye must be born again." The war was on, indeed. The actual fighting started out in low key, like the muted rumbling of distant thunder, then rose and swelled and subsided and rose and swelled again, taking enough surprise turns to boggle the imagination. There were minor skirmishes at first, with both sides hoping to keep it down to this scale and prevent escalation if possible. It was in one of these skirmishes that Will sallied forth, fell in upon the rear of Captain Boanerges' men, and captured 3 prisoners. He delivered them eagerly to Diabolus, glad of a chance to reinstate himself, for he still felt rather a fool for the hesitant way he had conducted himself on the city wall. "Who are you?" said Diabolus, when they were brought before him. The question was a matter of form, he already knew. "Mr. Tradition, sire. Mr. Human Wisdom, sire. Mr. Man's Invention, sire." "You don't sound like the king's men," said Diabolus. "Are you proselytes?" "Well, hardly," said Mr. Tradition. "We came upon Shaddai's captains while they were on their way here, and offered our services," said Mr. Human Wisdom. "Actually," said Mr. Man's Invention, "we do not live so much by religion as by the fates of fortune. Whichever way the wind blows, you know." "Ah, yes," said Diabolus. "And if you are willing to entertain us, you are willing to serve me." "Yes, I understand," said Diabolus. He was already scribbling a note. "I'm sending you to one of my captains. He will take care of you. You will be made at least sergeants, perhaps even armor-bearers." He handed Will the note. "Will you escort them to see that they get quartered and settled?" he said. Will took the note and departed in a hustle with his charges, with ruffling words and much heel-clicking. "Who'd you send them to?" said Beelzebub after they had left. Captain Anything, naturally, said Diabolus. Naturally, said Beelzebub. A week later the explosion occurred. The king's men had managed to dismount 2 guns on a tower over Eargate, the guns called High Mind and Heady. The townsmen answered with shout against shout, charge against charge. New officers were thrown into the front lines. Mr. Puff-Up, Sergeant Prejudice, Captain Anything, who had for his armor-bearer Mr. Man's invention, and yes, Sergeant Tradition and Sergeant Human Wisdom. With battering rams, with slings, with guns, with swords, the battle raged. But Eargate could not be broken down. The casualties began to mount. One good shot blasted a hole in the roof of Lord Mayor Understanding's castle and let in some light. Lord Wilby-Will was almost killed outright with a sling, but he recovered. Many of the aldermen were slain. Other guns were dismounted and laid flat in the dirt, but Eargate held fast. When the great battle was over and smoke cleared, the awful truth was that the first round belonged to Mansoul. The king's captains retreated to their winter quarters, a safe distance away. It was all over but the shouting. But nobody in the town felt like shouting. Something had happened to Mansoul. Even though the townspeople were safe inside, they could not sleep. They tried to be merry again. Look, they told themselves, we can do anything we want to. There's no limit, no law, no censorship. There are no restrictions at all. But the things that they could do had somehow lost their appeal. Alarm flares kept going up from the camp of Shaddai's army. They could be seen from Mansoul all too well. The nights were the worst. Sometimes Captain Conviction would take all 10,000 of his men and run around the walls of the town all night, shouting the battle cry, "Ye must be born again." These alarms from without had a wearing down effect on the townfolk of Mansoul, and out of their weariness came whispers, "We cannot go on like this, and perhaps we should return to King Shaddai and end our troubles, and in fear. But would he take us now?" But by some strange coincidence these alarms had a stimulating effect on old Mr. Constance. He could not be drugged any more, but began to roar with the voice of thunder that shook the whole town and set everyone in trembling. There was no noise now so terrible to Mansoul as the voice of conscience and the shoutings of the captains. Certain things began to grow scarce in Mansoul, reaching the proportions of famine. Upon all her pleasant things there was a blast, a burning instead of beauty. Wrinkles now, and some shows of the shadow of death were on the inhabitants. They would have gladly exchanged anything they had for peace of mind. Peace of mind? Shaddai's captains kept sending summons by Take Heed What You Hear, Boanerges' trumpeter, to add to Mansoul's misery. The first time he treated them gently, then a little more roughly. The third time he dealt with them very roughly, telling them he did not know whether the captains were inclining to mercy or judgment. It was this third summons that precipitated the parley. A parley! The cry rang out, and the good news spread quickly all over town. Yes, they were going to talk peace. The officials of Mansoul were even now drawing up the terms under which they would surrender. The day was set. The crowds gathered and waited eagerly as the trump sounded. The captains came up in their harness and with their 10,000s at their feet, and it was announced that the townsmen had heard and considered the summons and would come to an agreement with them and with their king Shaddai upon certain terms that Diabolus had ordered them to propound. Then the conditions were read by Wilby-Will. "These are our conditions of peace," he bellowed. "We will submit to King Shaddai upon the following conditions. 1. That our town officials still rule and govern Mansoul. 2. That no man now serving under Diabolus be cast out. 3. That we may still enjoy certain rights and privileges granted us under our master Diabolus. 4. That no new law or officer have power over us without our consent." Captain Boanerges, who had stiffened at the first condition, stepped forward. His voice was low, but it carried to the farthest listener. "O inhabitants of Mansoul, when I first heard your trumpet sound for a parley with us, I was glad. When you said you were willing to submit yourselves to our king and lord, I was yet more joyous. But when, by your silly provisos and foolish quibbling, you laid the stumbling block of your iniquity before your own faces, my joy has turned to fear for you." His voice rose. "I perceive that old Ilpaz had a hand in drawing up those proposals. They are not fit to be heard by anyone who even pretends to serve Shaddai. In the name of my king, I refuse and reject your conditions with the highest disdain." Mansoul was shocked into silence. But old Mansoul, Boanerges' voice turned to pleading, "If you will but give yourselves into the hands of our king, and trust him to make his terms will be profitable to you. Trust yourself to Shaddai. He demands nothing less than unconditional surrender." Unconditional surrender? Old Unbelief leaped forward. "Consider what you are doing. Who would be so foolish as to take the staff out of his own hands and put it into the hands of someone who wants such complete submission?" He turned frantically to the Mansoulians. "If you once yield, if you give yourselves up to another, you are no longer your own. To give yourselves up to an unlimited power is the greatest folly." His voice seemed to ricochet along the walls and echo and re-echo endlessly, and the Mansoulians stood there, stunned and silent, listening. That did it. After the silence, they all began to talk at once. They were thrown into confusion, beyond all hope of reaching an agreement. When the officials returned to the castle, Diabolus was waiting, and he was delighted. He slapped old Unbelief on the back as they went into the chamber of state. "My Lord Mayor," he said, "my faithful Unbelief, what a remarkable job you did. If we ever get through this mess, I shall one day make you my universal deputy. Yes, why not? How would you like that? I hear you even kept understanding in that old fool Conscience from being at the parley. Oh, you clever. Here, have a cigar. Imported brimstone. Take the whole box. My universal deputy someday, yes. Next to me, you'll have all nations under your hand. Nor shall any of our vassals walk more at liberty than those that shall content to walk in your fetters." Mayor Unbelief left the chamber of state, his head in the clouds with dreams of future power. Imagine, universal deputy. So puffed up was he that he did not see the mob coming toward him until they were almost upon him. He opened his mouth to speak, then stopped, stunned. They were headed by Lord Understanding and Mr. Conscience. Impossible, but it was so, and they were angry. He stopped, drew himself up to his full height, and prepared to quash the wrath in the bigness and the show of his countenance. But they would not be quashed. They came on, running. He decided to run too. He turned and fled, they upon his heels, until he came to his house, where he slipped in through the front door, bolted it behind him, and decided that he could address them with more dignity from an upper window. In a moment he popped his head out. Where'd you come from? Who let you out?" he bawled, and then he got hold of himself. Gentlemen," he said, "what is the reason for this uproar?" Lord Understanding stepped forward. "You would not let Mr. Conscience and me be at the parley," he cried. "You propounded terms of peace that could not possibly be accepted without making King Shaddai a mere figurehead, and you charged Shaddai's captains with treachery when they offered mercy." "Treason! Treason!" Unbelief shouted. "To your arms, O trusty friends of Diabolus!" "Call it treason if you like," said Understanding, "but those captains deserve better treatment at your hands." "I spoke for my prince," wailed Unbelief. "Stop the dramatics," old Mr. Conscience broke in, "and don't answer the mayor like that. He has spoken the truth. And don't be so impudent. You have caused enough grief. If you'd accept the conditions, we would not be in a state of war right now." "Watch it," cried Unbelief. "I'll report you to Diabolus, and you'll have to answer for your words. Meanwhile, we'll seek the good of the town without any help from you." "You and Diabolus are impostors," cried Understanding. "You seek the good of the town?" "Treason!" shouted Unbelief again, and he leaned so far out he nearly fell from his window. His cries brought results. Lord Wilby-Will and Mr. Prejudice and several aldermen and burgesses and even old Ill-Paws himself came running up to ask the reason of the hubbub. With that, everybody began to talk at once, and no one could be heard distinctly. "Hold it! Hold it!" Unbelief bellowed. There was a sudden silence. "My lord," said Unbelief to Will-be-Will. Now his voice could have been spread on a cracker. "There are a couple of peevish gentlemen here who have, as the fruit of their bad dispositions, I fear, gathered a mob against me and caused this tumult. It is not myself alone that I care for, but methinks they are attempting to run the town into acts of rebellion against our prince. It's preposterous. Mutiny! Call it mutiny, then. We'll fight." And they did. First words. "Take them to prison." "Oh, no, you won't." "Unbelief, live forever." "The devil he will. We'll chop him down now." "Down with censorship. Up with forget good." "Long live Mr. Conscience." "Should I's captains would ruin our economy. Should I's captains offered us mercy." Then blows. Whoosh! Old Conscience was knocked down twice by Mr. Benumbing. But for a poor aim, Lord Understanding would have been slain with a musket. But it wasn't all one-sided. Whop! Please keep in mind when this was written. Mr. Mind beat the brains out of Mr. Rashhead. Old Mr. Prejudice was kicked, thrown in the dirt, and had his crown cracked to boot. Captain Anything wasn't popular on either side because he'd never been true to anyone. He was pushed back and forth from one side to the other. He got one of his legs broken, and some wished it had been his neck. Oh, what a fight! What a futile, useless fight! Lord Will-be-Will was seen to smile when he saw Old Prejudice tumble in the dirt. When Captain Anything came halting up to him, he seemed to take but little notice. He really did not take one side more than the other. But Will-be-Will was no match for Diabolus, nor was Mansoul. Fighting within, confusion was the old master's best weapon, and turning Mansoul's best efforts into shambles his genius. With all his awakening, it was a shameful page in their history that Mansoulians listened to him again. But after the dust settled, they did. Diabolus finally threw Conscience and Lord Understanding in prison, made another speech full of double talk on liberty, and reduced them all to simpering idiots again. Eargate remained closed. Blind, blind Mansoul. It could not stand up against Diabolus or resist his wiles, and so its bravest efforts went down in defeat. But far, far away, over the hills and plains, another army was marching to aid the four brave captains outside the city walls. An army headed by none other than Prince Emmanuel himself. An army that could not be resisted. No, Mansoul was no match for Diabolus, but Emmanuel was. Hang on, I have to check how many. Yep, okay. So this would be, I believe, chapter 10. Emmanuel enters the fray. An army that couldn't be resisted marching toward the town of Mansoul. An army headed by none other than King Shaddai's son, Prince Emmanuel. In their quarters, Shaddai's captains heard the tidings from the forerunners, sent ahead to bring the good news. They delivered up a shout of joy that rent the earth and made the mountains shake, and they made preparations to send a party out to meet him. Here's another reason why the Sons of Thunder reference doesn't make sense. All of these forerunners would have been prophets, according to the timeline of Scripture. It's a mess, but it's an allegory, so that's forgivable. They delivered up a shout of joy that rent the earth and made the mountains shake, and they made the preparations to send a party out to meet him. In the town of Mansoul, things went on as usual. They felt the trembling of the earth and heard the shouts, but they were so completely engrossed in their own pleasures and lusts that they scarcely paid them any heed. In the chamber of state, Diabolus sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by his warlords. "Do they know in the town?" said Beelzebub. "They are not concerned," said Diabolus. "They are woefully besotted now and completely indifferent, thanks to our strategy." "And you?" said Apollyon. "I have felt the weight of Emmanuel's hand already," said Diabolus glumly. "I know better than to be indifferent." He rose heavily and went over to one of the large windows, wiped away some cobwebs, and strained his eyes to see across the plains. Legion brought over some field glasses, and they all followed and huddled there by the window, watching. What an army! First, the noble Captain Faith. His were the red colors, and his standard-bearer was Mr. Promise. On his shield was the Holy Lamb with the golden shield. Next came the famous Captain Goodhope. His were the blue colors, and his standard-bearer was Mr. Expectation. On his shield he had the 3 golden anchors. The third was the valiant captain, Captain Love. His were the green colors, and his standard-bearer was Mr. Merciful. On his shield he had 3 destitute orphans. The fourth was that gallant commander, Captain Guileless. His standard-bearer was Mr. Harmless, and his were the white colors. On his shield he had 3 golden doves. The fifth and last was Captain Patience. His standard-bearer was Mr. Sufferlong, and his were the black colors. On his shield he had 3 arrows through the golden heart. Each captain had 10,000 men under him, and the prince headed them all, riding in his chariot. Oh, how their trumpets sounded, and how their armor glittered, and how their colors waved in the wind! The prince's armor was all of gold, and it shone like the sun. The captain's armor were of silver, and were like glittering stars. And they came prepared to fight. They had battering rams and slings, all made of pure gold, 66 in all. In case you don't know, there are 66 books in the Protestant canonical scriptures. When they got to the camp, another shout went up, louder than before. "What will you do?" asked Diabolus' warlords. "Watch, and for now, wait," said Diabolus. "I'll think of something when the time comes." But the very castle was trembling under their feet. Emmanuel's army began to beset the town. They surrounded it. They cast up mounts against it in small banks. Mount Gracious, Mount Justice, Plain Truth Hill, No Sin banks. And the slings and battering rams were placed on these mounts and banks, the biggest on Mount Hearken, near Eargate. Whichever way Mansoul looked, it saw force and power lying in siege against it. Then the preliminary operations began. Diabolus and his warlords watched from the castle. "There is a flag up on Mount Gracious," said Beelzebub, "offering mercy." "So I see," said Diabolus. "What do you think they'll do?" "I don't expect them to do anything. The Mansoulians have the proper attitude, a dumb and prayerless spirit, scorned to cry for mercy." "And there goes a red flag on Mount Justice, warning of judgment," said Apollyon. "And a black flag threatening the execution of judgment," said Legion. "They have my helmet, the hope of getting by as you are and doing well at last," said Diabolus. "We're safe, if they've been doing their homework." There's no response. They've been doing their homework. They kept close watch. Mansoul did not respond. Then Emmanuel sent a messenger to explain to the Mansoulians what he meant by those signs and ceremonies of the flags, and to ask of them which of the things they would choose, grace and mercy, or judgment and the execution of judgment. Some sort of an answer was clearly mandatory. One did not ignore Prince Emmanuel, but they were at their wits' end as to what to answer. In a spurt of bravura, they sent him a message saying that they did not make either peace or war without Diabolus, and that they would petition him to go down to the wall, and there give you such treatment as he shall think fit and profitable for us. They were too far gone to realize what a pathetic picture they made, or how monstrous their errors were. Then they went to Diabolus. He huffed and puffed and tried to put them off by circumlocution. But somebody has to answer him, they wailed, and we don't know how. So in the end he agreed to go down and answer, but he was afraid. I'll go down to the gates and give him such an answer as I think fit, he said. And he went down to Mouth Gate and addressed himself to Emmanuel, but in his own language, so the town would not witness his humiliation. O great Emmanuel, Lord of all, he said, I know you, that you are the son of the great Shaddai. But why have you come here to torment me and to cast me out of my possession? This town of Mansoul, as you very well know, is mine. Mine by right of conquest. I won it. Mine by their say-so. They opened their gates to me. They've sworn fidelity to me and have openly chosen me to be their king. They've also given their castle over to me. Yes, they've chosen me. He crouched and cringed as he stood before Emmanuel, but he went on. Moreover, they have disavowed you. Yes, they've cast your law, your name, your seal, and all that is yours behind their backs. Ask your captains. Ask them. They'll tell you what Mansoul's answers to all the summons have been. Loyalty to me and scorn to you. His voice became whining now. Now you are the just and holy one and should do no wrong. In the name of all that's just and holy, go away and leave me in peace. Emmanuel had waited through this twaddle. When it was quite finished, the golden prince stood up. Mansoul, yours by conquest? He said. Oh no. Yours by fraud, by lies, by deceit. You perverted the intent and purpose of my father's law. You overcame Mansoul by promising them happiness in their transgressions against my father's law, since you knew from your own experience that that was the way to undo them. Then you defaced my father's seal in Mansoul and set up your own. And then you stirred them against my father's captains and made them fight against those who were sent to deliver them from their bondage. Diabolus looked nervously back towards the town. I am not finished, said Emmanuel. Diabolus braced himself to stay. Mansoul is mine, Emmanuel went on. Mine by inheritance from my father. My father built Mansoul with his own hands. That palace is in the midst of that town he built for his own delight, and I am my father's heir, and the only delight of his heart. His it was, and he gave it to me. Mansoul is my desire, and the joy of my heart. Diabolus was getting visibly uncomfortable. And Mansoul is mine by right of purchase, said Emmanuel. I have bought it. Mansoul trespassed against my father, and my father had said that in the day that they broke his law they would die. Now it is more possible for heaven and earth to pass away than for my father to break his word. Wherefore, when Mansoul listened to you and broke that law, I became security to my father. For I would die for Mansoul's sin, and my father accepted the security. So when the time appointed was come, I bore Mansoul's sin in my own body on the cross. And for Mansoul's sin I laid down my life. On the third day my father raised me from the dead. The transaction is completed. Nor did I do this by halves. My father's law and justice are both now satisfied, and very well content that Mansoul should be delivered. But I have no more to say to you. I have a word for Mansoul. Not if I can help it, muttered Diabolus, and he slithered through the gate, back into town, and back to issue frantic orders. O Mansoul, I am touched with compassion for you, Emmanuel called out. You have opened your gates to Diabolus, but have shut them fast against me. You will listen to him, but you have stopped your ears to my cry. He brought you destruction, and you received both him and it. I have come to bring you salvation, but you do not regard me. Listen to me, Mansoul. Listen to my word, and you will live. I am merciful, Mansoul. Do not shut me out of your gates. All my words are true. I am mighty to save. But the gates were locked and bolted, and nobody heard him.